Hello and welcome to another evening of frank conversation here on Hard Copy, coming to you from our studios in Abuja. I'm Maokwe Ogun Yusuf. Now first, I must say that we do not take it for granted when you write back to us. And the feedback we received on last week's interview with Fisayo Shoyombo, which focused on kidnapping and the seeming helplessness of the state, is deeply appreciated. Now some of you relieved the trauma of similar scenarios, and we know that that couldn't have been easy. But we hope that you're comforted by the knowledge that you're not alone, even as we continue to pray and hope and advocate for the safe return of the Greenfield University students. Victor, Professor Walter Olo, and Mr. Ani, thank you for your mails. Tonight, we turn our attention to a matter that deals with my immediate constituency, the media. The 3rd of May each year is marked as International Press Freedom Day. The theme this year is information as a public good. The Nigerian media has had a checkered history when it comes to press freedom. Repressive military regimes restricted freedoms in a way that was oftentimes brutal, with some journalists paying the ultimate price, while others had to flee into exile. The hope was that with a return to democracy, the press would be freer to carry out its work. Has this expectation been met? If it has, how has it enhanced our democracy? I have with me tonight 2 seasoned journalists. Dapo Oloronyomi is the publisher and chief executive officer of Premium Times, an online newspaper, and also the executive director of Premium Times Center for Investigative Journalism. And Emmanuel Ogbeche is the chairman of the Nigerian Union of Journalists, FCT chapter. Gentlemen of the press, welcome to Hard Copy.
Thank you. It's an honor.
Indeed. I mean, gentlemen of the press, I had to say that. There is no lady. But even if there was a lady here, we'll all be gentlemen, wouldn't we?
In a day like this, sure.
But indeed, the matter at hand is a familiar terrain. Mr. Oloronyomi, you can be considered a veteran in this business. You've been practicing while some of us were still at our mother's apron strings. How would you describe press freedom today?
I think, and thank you obviously for bringing me in here. I think the best way to understand press freedom first is to look at it in terms of its categorization. When we talk of press freedom, we're looking at the regimes of laws and the legal framework. We're looking at independence of the play in the field. We're looking at structures of pluralism, and definitely the question of the safety of the journalist. So if you look at it on the basis of these 4 metrics, the international audit institutions, if you like, think that things are worsening in the past 5 years in Nigeria. Indeed, the Reporters Without Border that brings out this annual grading says that we are in the flat bottom structure. Locally, we also have a press attack tracker which shows that in the past 5 years, what we are seeing is really a total deterioration. And this is, I mean, looking at those 4 matrices, that things are getting worse.
So we're regressing?
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's very worrisome. I don't know if it has anything to do with the current environment we found ourselves. I took time to go through the president's goodwill message to journalists on the occasion of International Press Freedom Day. I don't know if you had the chance to go through it, Mr. Ogbeche.
I did.
But, you know, he said something about everything that is permitted must have rules of correctness, particularly in a polity seriously challenged as ours. The media must be sensitive to what we're going through as a country. Anything that would exacerbate the situation and further inflame passions and emotions should be avoided. It says we do not need to encourage incendiary words and actions that could further hurt our unity and diversity. Would you put the fact that we're not doing so well, I mean, the fact that we have regressed, because while we'll talk about regressing in press freedom, we can also safely say that the security situation has regressed, and we have been, you know, in very precarious situations, at least since 2015 up till now. I mean, the elections, people thought that we're going to split. We didn't split as a country, but the aftermath, we don't seem to have recovered from that, in addition to the numerous security challenges that we're facing. Would you put it down to the environment?
Yes, I think the environment has a lot of factors to play. And the idea that government thinks it shouldn't be held responsible also is a factor, because the issue of accountability to the people is seriously lacking. So political players are certainly going to play on this, which they are doing, because government has simply failed to give account of what it has done and to dialogue with the people. And if this continues, the situation will only worsen as time goes on towards 2023.
You know, I always enjoy reading the editorials you have on Premium Times. They don't come out very often, but when they do come out, they can be very poignant. And while I was reading it, what occurred to me was, who are they writing for? What response are they going to get, you know, to this particular editorial? Increasingly, do you think that government is tone deaf to what journalists are? Is that a new response mechanism that they have also adopted?
Yeah, I think generally this is a perception out there. And I think also the kinds of analysis of reality that you tend to get from government, sometimes it's so asymmetrical to, you know, what I think most people see. He's just raised an issue about this situation with insecurity. I mean, you have to give it to it. You know, the whole country is really in a crisis definition at this point. The economy is just struggling. Social life, you know, things are tough for people. You cannot then take these and take this very wild jump and then characterize situations of dissent, of commenting and so on, and then put all this to people trying to overthrow the government.
Oftentimes when we talk about press freedom, we look at it in relation to government. And perhaps rightly so too, but it would seem that, you know, we're not only held accountable by government, and increasingly our publics are, you know, getting a way to also make us accountable to them.
Yeah.
I don't know who you fear more these days. Do you fear government or social media? It's just a thought that's going through my head. What are your thoughts on that with the emergence of social media? And you practice largely online.
Yes, I think the rise of social media is good for all of us. And I do not think any serious media organization, traditional or otherwise, that doesn't have a presence on social media. Mm-hmm. We all do. Mm-hmm. Because we cannot surrender the social media space to the citizen who isn't trained, who isn't in the know of the nuances of the media, of journalism. We understand that it is a process in collating, in processing and disseminating this information. So we are all part and parcel of the social media space. And I think when I look at Premium Times, for instance, you realize it has a very large following. And that tells you that people still trust the conventional media that is within the social media space. You understand? I am also worried about the government because there are legal frameworks that are in existence that curtails our press freedom. Let us take, for instance, the Cyber Crime Prevention and Prevention Act of 2015. That act alone constricts what you can do online, even as a media organization. Let us also look at the new NBC code, which has been very controversial. So it isn't just about whether we are particularly worried about the social media. I think I'll be more worried about government, because government as a state can clamp down seriously, while the people will hold you accountable, and you should be able to be in a position to explain your way out of it. But most times with government, you know, it is very difficult because you'll be balkanized, and that is exactly what we are seeing. And that's why we're insisting that any law that is repressive, any law that is not in tandem with what that should promote free press should be repelled.
It is interesting when you talk about security, and I think that's I mean, you have been in and out of, you've been on exile, reporting during the Abacha regime. When you got back only last year, you were arrested by the police on complaints from the military. The fact that we are in pretty dire security straits, you know, increasingly makes us to want to inquire further as to, you know, or demand more accountability from our security agencies. And increasingly we're told that, oh, security is something that, you know, has this dark cover over it. For security reasons, we cannot inquire further.
Yeah.
How is that? It seems a paradox of sorts. But how do you think journalists can navigate that?
Well, first, it's what's the duty of the journalists. Constitutionally, I mean, there's a legal order to what we need to do. This may not be well known to most people. Section 22 is what we always look to, a constitution, which says it's the duty of the media to hold government accountable. And are we doing this well enough? I will say no. And when government feels any sense of pain, it is important that, you know, the media is understood as a kind of surrogate parliament. Indeed, I think it's so important that it is the media, only the media actually, that's given that kind of role in our constitution. So there can be no sacrosanct areas, no. I mean, security, it's too important to be left alone only to the generals.
Are we pushing enough to,
no,
to press that point home?
No. That's my point. We're not pushing enough. We don't. I mean, look, take just the question of security spending. The appropriation of the whole security process, it's so opaque. So we really need to dig further. And that's been coming out from the kind of what we're saying in Parliament between the generals and the Parliament now.
And that makes, just a moment, and that makes it almost a little hopeless. Because sometimes you ask if those in Parliament cannot get the answers that the people demand.
Exactly.
You know, what hope do journalists have of being able to inquire?
Yeah. But journalists must keep inquiring, you know, pushing, extending the boundaries.
You know that most often than not, you write to government agencies, not just the military. And they tell you the FY Act doesn't cover us.
Yeah.
And you're stuck in court for a year for ordinarily a matter that shouldn't last for more than a month. Now, the issue of the security vote and budget, even the Office of the Auditor General cannot audit the military. Just look at the various reports. The issue of military spending is totally missing for over 6 years or more.
Yeah.
So it's even increasingly difficult if government agencies that ordinarily ought to have access, you know, how much more journalists? Journalists have been trying. We've written several letters to ministry departments and agencies bordering on corruption, taken from the report of the Auditor General and the Open Treasury Portal, and they will never respond to you.
Sorry, when you say the FOI doesn't cover us, what sort of response is that? I mean, what do they mean by the FOI doesn't cover journalists?
No, it covers journalists.
No, not journalists. Yeah. The ministries, departments, and agencies of government.
You know, security sector tends to be...
Say national security and all of those.
Yeah, so there are just areas of the FOI that is a little in shield and makes it difficult, you know, for you to use tools like that to engage. Whatever role that the media will play ultimately will depend on how the judiciary and within the common law traditions, if you look at how the judiciary understands issues of press freedom in even places like Ghana, South Africa, you know, India, Canada, people who still work within the kinds of laws that we do, far liberal interpretations of law. And when you see the kinds of things that come out of the Nigerian judicial system, you will be struck. What kind of country are you in? And interestingly, it was even better under military rule. So something really has happened to the Nigerian judiciary, and I think actors in that sphere need to really engage with their community. Yeah. We really need a democracy a judiciary that understands that's working for democracy. And if democracy fails, that is largely on account of also what they are doing or not doing.
Gentlemen, how big a role does money play in hampering press freedom?
Incredibly great, yeah. Indeed, of all the new threats facing the media today, what we generally call the sustainability models of the media had become front and center, totally displacing what we had in the past, when a crazy dictator just comes, shoots his gun, arrests you and puts you in jail. No. Today, the economics, the business models that sustains the work we do, mostly advertising, and in the case of newspapers, a circulation, it's totally off the rail. So that's really why newspapers are crumbling, radio station broadcasts are failing. So we really need to look at this, and in other parts of the world, this is something that governments themselves are seriously looking into. It's not happened that much here.
What are your thoughts on money and journalism?
Well, like Dr. said, it's very huge. It may not be an official state policy, but I think behind the scene, there is an attempt, especially in Africa, to weaken the media. But the danger is that democracy and the rule of law is endangered in the process. Because when you have a weak and fragile media, you have individuals that are compromised, journalists and media workers that cannot stand up, for what is right and will easily sell out.
Fundamentally, really, you can build a democracy which is not undergirded by a very, very strong media. Should we then surrender, to government financing? In the past, we used to say no, absolutely. But all over the world today, governments are relooking this themselves and saying that the media is so tangible, so critical to the whole project of democracy, and there's a need to really start appropriating some kind of funding in this regard.
I'm sure if they had overlooked it, disinformation during the period of COVID would have pressed home the news. At that point, you would have thought that, there will be maybe not just one center, but at least the messaging will be firm and will be clear and will be sure, and citizens will know what it is that they're consuming. But at that point, where we saw different kinds of information coming in, some not even believing that there was any such thing as COVID, or this is some attempt at government manipulation, or what were your thoughts? What ran through your mind when you saw that?
Well, let me...
And we're still seeing the effects still today.
Yes, let me use this opportunity to commend the Nigerian media for being patriotic and nationalistic, because we stood up to be counted without waiting for government financing, without waiting for government adverts or intervention. Jingles were created, discussions were held, continually on the issue of COVID. Credible and verified scientific information were passed across. I was worried because as a whole, the government messaging was poor. Organizations that were saddled with the responsibility, like the NOAA, were either entirely missing or were shoddy about how their messaging was.
That's National Orientation Agency.
Yes. It was left for media organizations to undertake that difficult and challenging task, to say no. We must become the arbiters of credible and verifiable news during COVID and up till now.
No other time, I think, has the community come to appreciate the need for a verifiable, very professional media. And the whole work at fighting disinformation and misinformation is so central to public health, central to democracy, to good economic planning, and at the heart of all that is a very professional media.
How would you say that broadcast media, and I think this is more about broadcast now, navigate this, very tricky terrain of digitization?
I think we're lucky. We have institutions like channels and a few of the private broadcasters who are really doing a terrific job. But you know that historically the zone of broadcasting is the area where government really has a major play, and no other administration to my view, has really understood this better than the current administration. We've just had, I could say, the most choking hold on the broadcast sector. You know, take television, take radio, take the news agency, take, of course, then the regulator itself. Broadcasting is really an area we really have to be concerned about. The temperature in the land is largely dictated, you know, from the kinds of things that come from broadcasting. However, it needs to be circled back to how licenses are granted, and then that gets us back to the regulator. Indeed, there's a relationship between how you offer those licenses and how that in turn comes to create, you know, the kind of division in the society. I think it gets back to the government, and that's why when we talk about press freedom, we need to link those categories. You know, the whole issue of license issuance, how you control the regulator, and all that. They are very, very critical to the regime of press freedom.
Well, we're certainly not, well, I don't want to say we're not faring, we're not faring well. Let's call a spade a spade. If we're not faring well, we're not faring well. If they say we have regressed in the last 5-6 years, then we have regressed in the last 5-6 years.
True.
But the thing is, we don't want to remain where we are. The idea is to make progress.
Yeah.
Yes.
What would you say to fellow journalists as we wind down, who are still practicing and who are hoping for a freer and, will I say, because some people sometimes also go in here for their livelihoods, who are also concerned about their livelihoods. What would you say to them that we can walk towards or look through even as another year approaches?
Well, first, you must not surrender your professionalism for filthy lucre. You need to understand that it's a calling. It isn't just, I think when you look at people
It isn't just a profession.
No, it isn't just a profession. It's a calling. If you look at people like Dapo, they inspire you. Because if it were simply about a profession and to make ends meet, he wouldn't be here. But I think when you build credibility over time...
You laugh.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
When you build credibility over time, I think you will reap the reward.
Yeah.
You understand? But if you become cheap in the process and you lack the social capital, there is no way you can get to the top of this. And it's also good that along the line, if you have, we say, side hustle these days, you know, so that you do not sell your soul to the devil simply because you want to survive.
What if your business is in such a way that it is threatened by the authorities and they know that? What are you going to do about that? I mean, it's a very difficult thing to match. Is there
tough.
anything else that can be done for journalists?
No, I think we need to be a little more creative and innovative around the challenges that we face. Emmanuel's right. One of the biggest challenges that we face today, of course, it's the whole question of how to finance journalism. Financing journalism today has to be different from what it was in the past. But so that's one challenge. The second, of course, is to keep being very professional. The challenge of accountability is very important. We have to double down on that. We have to fight disinformation because it also comes back to hurt and harm us. You know, I encourage you to see the kind of work we're doing on duba.org, which is a fact-checking platform. Yeah. These have been far more consequential than anything that I think the government's been doing. They're trying to, and this is how the media has been responding, at least making its own contribution in this regard. I guess, you know, we must also hope that the government can rise up and understand that building a modern democratic state has to put press freedom at the heart and center of it. It's not a gift at all, no. You can never, in fact, as they say, democracy deteriorates to the measure to which press freedom deteriorates. Yeah, so it has to be understood.
Gentlemen, thank you for your time on Hard Copy tonight.
Thank
it's
you
an honor.
for
Thank
this
you.
opportunity.
I've been speaking with Dapo Olorunyomi, who is the Chief Executive Officer, Publisher and Chief Executive Officer of Premium Times, and also the Executive Director of Premium Times Center for Investigative Journalism. Emmanuel Ogbechi is the Chairman of the Nigerian Union of Journalists, FCT chapter. Well, that's it on Hard Copy. We'd love to hear from you. Do send your feedback to the email address and social media handles on your screen. Thank you for watching. I'm Maokwe Ogun Yusuf.